the itinerary stays the same for each group. Of course, we took a year off for COVID, so this year's cohort was a little larger. And so the itinerary, we fly into Edinburgh, spend some time in Edinburgh touring the different historical landmarks there, visiting different areas, and we sort of follow the path of the Reformation.
The Texas Hill Country is one of the most beautiful places on earth. In this podcast, recent Hill Country resident Tom Fox visits with the people and organizations that make this one of the most unique areas of Texas. Join Tom as he explores the people, places, and their activities of the Texas Hill Country.
Today I'm joined by Toby Appleton and Charlie Huebner, Schreiner University, to talk about their recent trip to Scotland. Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox, back for another episode, and today you're in for a real treat because I have with me Charlie Huebner and Toby Appleton. They are both at Schreiner University. We're going to talk a little Schreiner today, but we're really going to talk about a trek that they went on this summer to Scotland, a little bit more in the United Kingdom and Ireland, but whiskey tour and others. So, gentlemen, first of all, welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me today.
Thanks for having us, Tom. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what led to the genesis of the trek?
Several years ago, Schreiner University started a group called the Eddington Society. It is named after our second president, Dr. Andy Eddington, and this is a group that learns. We spend a year together, and each month get together and learn the history of the university, the history of Presbyterian Church and the Reformation, the history of Scotland. And then because we are bound by covenant and by choice to the Presbyterian Church, we take a trip to Scotland at the end of that year to actually get to walk the grounds of what we have researched and learned about throughout the year.
So what could you tell us a little bit about the itinerary of this year's trip?
Yeah, so this year's trip, and the itinerary stays the same for each group. Of course, we took a year off for COVID, so this year's cohort was a little larger. And so the itinerary, we fly into Edinburgh, spend some time in Edinburgh touring the different historical landmarks there, visiting different areas, and we sort of follow the path of the Reformation, going up and to Dundee and then across to Oban to the island of Iona. We spend a few days on Iona, which is, of all the places we went to, that was absolutely my favorite. It was amazing. It's a 3-mile long by 1 mile wide island, and just beautiful scenery. 160 people or so live on the island, and so it's really remote, but it was amazing. And then the journey back to Edinburgh from Iona, and that takes place over roughly 10 days, and a lot of stops along the way visiting the different kirks, castles that are all part of the Reformation in terms of the Presbyterian Church. So that part was really amazing and just a great journey for anyone interested in historical landmarks to visit. I don't know that we have a concept of old in America. When our country was born in the 1700s, and everything that we visited over there was 900, 800, and so the age of things is just, it really is overwhelming to think about how old. I was in a little tiny building that was built in the year 1000. And it just, the amount of people over that course of time that had been there was really special.
Toby, you mentioned the covenant between Schreiner University and the Presbyterian Church. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
We are by choice and covenant to the Presbyterian Church USA. I'm not sure when that began, all the way back to Captain Schreiner, I believe.
Yeah.
So the Presbyterian Church came to Captain Schreiner and basically said, hey, we want to build a school. And Captain Schreiner said, I see the reward in that, and he donated the land. So the Presbyterian Church and Captain Schreiner basically built Schreiner University. It started out as a military school for boys in the rural areas. And then as the history of Schreiner progressed, it brought in the girls' classes. It became co-ed. For a while, females were only day students. And then it became fully co-ed. Then in the 70s, we dropped high school. In the 80s, went to strictly college. 1999, 2000,
Became a university.
Became a 4-year university, all the way up to where we are now with master's programs. So the Presbyterian Church goes all the way back to our very beginning. And then the covenant and the association with the Presbyterian Church, albeit by choice, is still there today, almost 100 years later.
Can you tell us some of the ways that's manifested in 2022? Is there some sort of special Presbyterian training? Is there something, we're going to talk a lot more about that tour because I want to hear about the history of the Presbyterian Church, but how is it manifested today, or maybe even how do you feel it brings value to the Schreiner students literally in 2022?
So I think our relationship with the Presbyterian Church and being a Christian school is good for the students that are looking for those morals and ethics in their education. We're not a heavily religious school. There's not a mandatory religion class that everyone needs to take when they come. And frankly, most of our students are Roman Catholic. That association with the Presbyterian Church does allow for a robust university ministry. The offices over there are great with outreach, with volunteerism, and then just being a place for students to go to worship in their own denomination. So that it's not that we're a religious school by any stretch of the imagination, but we do appreciate and accept all religions.
Charlie, I want to pick up on the trail of, or rather maybe the evolution of Presbyterianism in Scotland. Where did it originally start, and then how did it move across the country?
And I don't know that it moved across the country in the way that we did. Now, it moved around the world, absolutely. I think our sort of trail that we just picked up on the different landmarks. I don't know that we were following a particularly chronological timeline, but John Calvin and the Church of Scotland, that whole Reformation period there was a lot of movement around the world in terms of Christianity and how Christianity talked to a lot of people about the different religions that we have in the world and how they all were born and came. And Christianity, as a flavor of religion, has many different flavors within Christianity, and Presbyterian was one of them. So in the Reformation, and we went to St. John's Kirk and got to visit where these great leaders of the time came and spoke to the masses.
Where John Knox himself gave the sermon that started the Reformation.
And all of that with ties to the Church of Scotland and how that was in that history. Now, I'm not a historian by any means, but in that moment, there was a moment in time where John Knox came to Scotland and began preaching a change. And in that moment, it really began to split. And so the Church of Scotland and Presbyterianism was born, and they began building their own momentum towards new Christianity.
You already had waves being made by Luther, his thesis with John Knox. So the waves were starting through Europe, through what is now the UK, and they just all cumulated at the same time, which is what is Presbyterianism that we know today.
So I'm Methodist by background and founded by John Wesley in England.
Yep.
And I've traveled to John Wesley's home, and I found it incredibly powerful. I've also gone to sermons or services in England, Methodist sermons, and there they speak of John Wesley literally as a living person that's speaking to them today through his written word. Is that the kind of reverence that you saw for John Knox, or is he seen as a truly historical figure?
I felt more as a historical figure.
Yeah.
Someone changed the course, if you will, not necessarily as, like you said, with Wesley still talking to them. Now, I do believe that I got the sense that there were scholars that were delving into more deeply what Luther and Knox were doing, but the feel I got was more of just a great person.
I think being in any of these historical places, whether it's Wesley's house, St. John's Kirk, or on the island of Iona.
We went to Knox's house.
Yeah, we went to Knox's. And so to visit these places provides historical background, but it also, I think there's something special about feeling the reverence of a place in which something so powerful happened. So you can physically connect to that idea and that place. It's great to read about, and you go, oh, but being there and hearing the story and envisioning that the pew I'm sitting in or the pulpit I'm standing at this is where it started. And so I think there's something special about connecting to a physical place, and whether you see it as the individual that carried the power or that moment in time. And I think you can read about people and feel special about people, but if you can go to a place, you can transform your mind back to that moment when it happened, and there's a reverence that I felt. we talked about Iona and our visit to Iona, and it's called a thin place where the veil between human and God is thinner, even if just a slight bit, and how you feel that sense of awe being in a place that's that beautiful in nature. And so many people came before you of St. Columba, and in the journey of the church there, and how so many people were trained in Christianity, and the monks and why they chose that particular place of all the places in the world to study and build their religion and their foundation. I think it's just really special. I think travel provides that in a way that other things don't. Reading it in a book is great. Being there is different.
Tom, I'll go back a little bit on the historical versus deity, if you will. So we did the pilgrimage through St. Andrews to the St. Andrews Kirk. And at one time, that church would have been just a huge cathedral. And now it's just a crumbled old building with rocks laying everywhere. And the townspeople actually would come take the rocks from the falling down church to build their houses and to build fences. And they were making use out of the elements that were provided. So there wasn't a reverence for this crumbled down building like it is now. It's a historical landmark. But at the time it was, there's rocks. Let's go use them. Let's build our new sheep fence with it. So if that kind of brings it into a little bit of maybe how they look at John Knox and how that Reformation took place, it was just something that happened. They look at it with dignity, but it's just history.
Let me turn to the name of the island that you went to. Was that in the Outer Hebrides?
That is the furthest most west island of Scotland that's inhabited. So it is directly south of the island of Staffa, if you're familiar with Staffa.
So tell me a little bit of why you found that experience so powerful.
So not getting overly spiritual.
You can get spiritual.
When you step off the ferry, you feel something.
Yeah.
There is truly something spiritual, magical, whatever adjective you want to put in there about the place. The fact that it's not inhabited by a multitude of people. There's 160 full-time residents on the island. The hotel that we stayed at, we took up the entire hotel. And the hotel was St. Columba's former house that was converted into a hotel. Walk freely.
There's no trespassing laws. As long as you close the gates behind you, there were a lot of sheep. So I think, there's a lot of spiritual connection between humans and whatever your beliefs are that can be found in nature, because there's a grounding that happens when you find a beautiful place. And then you put that into a historical context. We took a ferry, and it was a rough ferry ride. So just thinking about our journey, they didn't want to run the ferry. They were literally guessing as to whether the weather was good enough to get on the ferry. We get on the ferry, and there's anywhere between 6 and 12 foot swells, and the ferry's teetering back and forth, and we're all holding on for what we felt was dear life.
We got off on the other side, and one of the ferry workers said, we shouldn't have done that, mate.
Oh, and it rains randomly there. The rains can get very rough and very sudden. And so it's pouring down. We get off the island. We get onto the island. We go to our hotel. We check in our hotel. And that night, every morning and every evening on the island, every morning and every evening at 9 and 9, they have a church service.
They have a service
in the Abbey. And so there's a big Abbey there. It's a beautiful Abbey. Beth is rumored to be buried in the cemetery right there between where we were staying and the Abbey. There are Vikings buried there. The building that I was referring to, the 1,000-year-old building, is right there. There's a lot of symbolism. All of that's on the island, and it's just beautiful.
So Tom, check this out. So the Celtic cross, the cross with the circle around it, world-known symbolism. We found out why that circle's around the cross. They had large crosses outside of the kirk to represent
their Christian beliefs. And it was huge.
They represented two saints, and the top of my head, I can't remember who they are. But the crosses were so big, they kept falling over. And every time they would fall over, the arms of the cross would break off. So the monks, just being engineering minds, decided we can put these supports in to hold the cross together, and that's where that circle and that cross came from.
It is absolutely a structural decision, and now it's a symbol years later. Again, the island there were magical moments on the island. We were there 4 days. One of the oldest golf courses in Scotland is on the island. And when I say old, it's old in the sense that the sheep are the groundskeepers, And the holes, the greens, you can't distinguish between the fairway and the green. So there's no one out there mowing it, so you're going to hit bums, sheep, dung, anything on the green. But this is how golf was played when golf first started. And so we decide one evening we're going to try to play this course, and we go out there and it's raining. Again, every evening it rains. Or it might not rain, you have no idea. In the first hole, we're going to play rain or shine. We'd made the decision. We play the first hole, we go line up, we hit the ball off the tee for the second hole, Toby and I, and then as we're walking the fairway, the rain goes out and a beautiful rainbow on the other side of the island appears. And then as we approach the third green, you can see the rainbow behind the hole. And I think there were moments like that just felt special, that were almost supernatural in a way. I don't think you get that just everywhere you go. You can see a rainbow in New York City if it rains, but you can't really experience what it feels like unless you're in a place like Iona. It's just so remote. I don't know that you can breathe fresher air coming off of the Atlantic Ocean in that way. You're so far away from civilization. It was just really special.
So we made the hike to St. Columba Bay, and it wasn't a hike for the faint of heart. It was a good 4 miles, and through the mountains. I showed you a picture just then, through quagmires and moors and bogs, and it was a significant hike. But you get there and it just opens up to this beautiful place. And the legend has it that St. Columba blessed that beach. And you can pick up a rock that calls out to you off of that beach and put all of the negative things in your life into that rock. Turn your back to the ocean, throw that rock over your shoulder into the water, and walk away and not look back. And then you leave those negative things there. There's also a marble quarry on Iona. Iona marble at one time was sought by kings, and you can find pieces of marble that just wash up on the beach. Again, supposed to be blessed by St. Columba and protect you from fire and drowning. So we all got little chunks of marble that we brought home with us. But it was a cool place. We went to Rosslyn Chapel, which was in the movie, Tom Hanks movie, the Da Vinci Code, yeah, where he found the actual location of the Ark of the Covenant. Went to that chapel. This thing was built in 500 AD by hand, and just the immaculate art carved into the sandstone that's still there today that you can visit and see with your own eyes is just a cool thing.
A number of people it took to construct a place like Rosslyn Chapel or any of these and what was really also very fun to see as you visit these older buildings is the masons that and how they would use their signature in very subtle ways to stamp their work. And some were more apparent than others, but they were almost a brand within the stonework. And it could just be 3 lines in an odd-shaped triangle. It could be the number 4. And you saw these, and these were the masons of the time who said, hey, I'm going to leave my mark here, and they would do that. And it was almost a scavenger hunt to go around and find the different masonry markings on the construction. But these guys were more than just construction. They were artists. Yeah. The carvings of the different angels and the demons and all of the different stuff that they put into the stonework was really amazing. And so just beautiful, handcrafted, with no machinery. They didn't have electricity. They didn't have grinders, and all of this was by hand.
And if you make a mistake, you have to start over. You're not just repairing this piece and moving on. You're literally starting. And then touring some of the castles, Edinburgh Castle, Stirling Castle, where Robert the Bruce was. Yeah, just walking in that history was pretty cool. And then you think of all the strife and turmoil that's happened in that area, and that these buildings were able to survive everything from World War II back to the Scottish-English wars. It was just a remarkable place.
Did you go to Culloden?
We did. Yeah. We went to the Battle of Culloden. We went to the battleground. Again, remarkable. You see the stick and grass huts, and you think about the massacres that occurred there with the Highland people. Yeah, just ugly history, but still a history all the same. Several battlefields, walking the coastal walk in Fife, beautiful. Walking the beaches in Fife. I was personally more impressed with the Highlands than I was the Lowlands. Got to see some Highland coos, look like cows that need a haircut.
Shaggy cows, yeah.
It almost like a Six Flags ride. You're on the road and there's waterfalls literally falling right next to you, and just cameras didn't do it justice. What your eyeballs were seeing was almost unimaginable. It was just absolute beauty.
So I took once the train ride from Fort William over to the West Coast so I could go to the Isle of Skye, and that's probably the most spectacular train ride I've ever been on because it went exactly through where you're talking about, the Western Highlands. And,
you could have took all the photos you want, and they're great photos, but it still does just doesn't do it justice.
A photo can't capture the awe and majesty of some of these places. When we took a ferry from Oban to Mole, and we drove across a one-lane road. It was an hour drive to get to take the ferry over to Iona, but that hour bus ride on a one-lane road where literally any time a car came, our bus had to get off the road. It was very interesting.
A little sketchy.
There's some pretty sketchy moments, but that drive across Mole in the Highlands of Mole, if I have one regret, if I go back, I really want to spend more time on Mole, which is really between Iona and the mainland. Because that was some of the falls that Toby's referring to as we're just passing by on the bus. It was awe-inspiring, the views. We drove around Loch Ness and got to see that while we were there.
I couldn't believe how big Loch Ness was. In my mind, it was a little lake.
Yeah, and it was massive. Yes, and
we weren't able to go to Staffa because the water was too rough. Yeah. But going to Staffa, that's where the puffins are. The cave of Fingal is there, and so that goes back into mythology and Fingal's cave. We wanted to go to Staffa, but the ocean was. You could see Staffa from our island. We just couldn't make it over there.
Did you get the chance to see any military tattoos?
No. So they were setting up at the Edinburgh Castle. They were setting up for a major tattoo. The Queen was actually expected to come to Scotland. They sent Princess Anne because she was sick. But they actually had St. Giles Cathedral closed down for the royal family to come. And the tattoo, it looked like a football stadium in front of Edinburgh.
They were getting
Castle.
ready for it. You could tell there was going to be quite a spectacle. I think what they said, August 1st. And they were preparing for it a month out, building a stadium just for this annual event. And I wish we could have seen it. We were there at the wrong time.
Did get to see the royal jewels and sword and the Stone of Destiny.
The Stone of Destiny.
Any other highlights that we've missed?
The trip was amazing. That portion of the trip, very different experience when you look at things when you're on a historical journey versus just vacation. And that portion of the trip was definitely
So my standout, Tom, was avid golfer, and I could not go to Scotland without going to the home of golf in St. Andrews. Unfortunately, they were getting ready for the 150th Open, and they were building the stands and getting everything ready, but I did get to walk the 18th hole and have my photo taken on the famous bridge there on 18. And a funny, trivial piece about this, they actually close that golf course down every Sunday, and it becomes the property of the community. They have picnics and bring their dogs out and just hang out on the golf course. No golf allowed, just hang out on the golf course as if it was a park. And I told the superintendent that I was talking to, he said, yeah, this belongs to the people. And I said, if we tried to do that at Augusta or even Colonial in Fort Worth, they would crucify us.
Yeah, we'd
He
get
goes,
run.
no, this golf course belongs to the people. Because I was nervous to actually walk out and get my photo taken.
We were trying to get permission
He
to
goes,
go out.
No, walk, go have fun.
No, do it.
Just
It's
a
your
public course?
Yeah,
Just a public.
It's just
owned by the community.
any everyday public course just happens to be St.
But that was my highlight of the entire trip, was to be able to walk where some of my sports heroes have walked, and things that I thought I'd only see on TV that I would never get to experience.
I think of the trip in two sections. So the highlight of the first part of the trip for me was Iona. And then there was the second leg of our trip where Toby and I stayed and broke off from the group in Dublin. And that was a completely different experience in which, we were there to hang out, see cool stuff, meet people, and have a good time. And that was definitely a different trip. And I think having both of those trips back to back gives you a different perspective on what travel can be.
Even back from my military days, going to foreign countries, I get an awesome sense of joy of just sitting and talking to townsfolk and having them just as amazed by you as you are of them, and getting to know behind the scenes really what makes Dublin tick or what makes Edinburgh tick. And then they want to know everything they can know about Texas. They hear you're from Texas, and instantly you own longhorns and ride horses and own big ranches. So
All true.
So a funny story, we were at a place getting fish and chips, and a guy came out and he said, so you're from Texas? He said, how many head of cattle do you have? I said, I don't have any cattle. I said, that's like me asking you how many head of sheep you have. He said, I have about 1.2 million. I went, probably the wrong question.
Gents, unfortunately, we're near the end of our time, but I forgot to ask you if you could tell us your role here at Schreiner. And Charlie, could I start with you?
Yeah, so I serve as the Dean of Students here at Schreiner. I've been here 10 years. I oversee the student activities, Greek life, housing, athletics, a lot of the non-academic student-focused functions. I get the opportunity to work with. I have a great staff. We have a lot of fun. And most people think of the Dean of Students and they think of the characters they know from movies like Dean Wormer, from Animal House, and those. That is part of my job.
I still do think of him like that.
It's part of my job is discipline on campus, but it's just a small portion of my job. So being a Dean of Students at a university is a lot of fun.
Toby?
And Tom, I'm a marketing and communications for the university. So I handle all media relations and press releases, as well as all internal and external marketing.
Well, gentlemen, I've really looked forward to this podcast. I wanted to thank you again for taking the time to visit with me. And I also wanted to thank you for posting what you did on social media, because I got to feel like I was there traveling along. Some of the, obviously, just a smidgen of what you saw and experienced. But when I can see people I know enjoying themselves that much, it puts a smile inside me.
Glad you could live vicariously through me.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. I look forward to continuing this conversation.
Thanks,
All right,
Tom.
thank you.